Next on the mic is our friend and favorite, Mr. Robert Zima, ladies and gentlemen, with some comedy. Here we go. Make sure you stand in the light. There we go.
Back up a little in the light. There we go.
Now let's get serious. My grandfather, he was very, very sick. And he went to the doctor. They did everything they could. And they said, I'm sorry, we've done everything we could. We're just gonna have to go home to die. So he's lying in his bed, just waiting to die. And he smells this wonderful smell coming in through the kitchen. His wife, my grandmother, was making her famous chocolate chip cookies. So he said to himself, just once more before I die, I want to have my wife's delicious chocolate chip cookies. So he dragged himself out of bed. He crawled up to the table. With his last ounce of strength, he reached up to grab his wife's wonderful chocolate chip cookies. My grandmother went over and slapped him and said, "You stop that, those are for the funeral." Now, you remember last summer when it was so hot, all those days above 100? So Greg Meza, I call him Amazing Meza because he's got the gift of helps on steroids. And he asked me to come over and help at the church. I said, well, I got the gift of mercy, the gift of help, so yeah, I'll be glad to help you. Of course, it's really hot. So we're working a couple hours, and Greg kind of scrunches up his nose. He says, I think the deodorant of one of us has stopped working. I said, it must be yours because I don't wear deodorant. Do you realize the kids these days, they can't tell time on a clock? I don't mean looking at their phone, I mean big hand, little hand. They can't tell time. They probably wouldn't make a very good fighter pilot. Enemy fighters, 2 o'clock high. Well, that's not for 2 hours. Do you know who the Apostle Paul's father was? It was the thief on the cross. I know that because he said my old man was crucified with Christ. What do you call a black astronaut? An astronaut, you racist. So last week, this guy comes to my door begging, wanted a handout, some food and so forth. I said, well, I'm a libertarian, I believe in you don't work, you don't eat. I'll tell you what, here's a bucket of paint. If you paint the porch, I'll give you a bologna sandwich. And the guy said, deal. So he comes back a couple hours later, he says, okay, I'm done. I'm like, okay, here's your bologna sandwich. He said, oh, by the way, it wasn't a Porsche, it was a Mercedes. So last week, Billy said there's going to be a meeting of the church board after the service. So he goes to his office after the service and this strange guy comes in. He said, you don't understand, this is a meeting of the church board. The guy said, if there's somebody here more bored than I am, I want to meet him. So the Pope came to LA and he said to his driver, he said, gosh, everybody always does everything for me. They even brush my teeth, clothe me. Could I just drive the car? And the chauffeur said, okay. So he's driving. He's really, this is freedom, right? He's winging down the freeway. Highway patrol pulls him over. And he calls his superior officer. He says, man, I just stopped somebody famous. He said, well, who is he? He said, well, I don't know, but he's got the Pope for a chauffeur. So I think you can see by now that I'm kind of a weird guy. In fact, one person told me I was kooky. So I went to this psychologist to be analyzed, and he told me I was crazy. I said, if you don't mind, I'd like a second opinion. He said, okay, you're ugly. Now, this guy was a bagpipe player, right? He was famous all over the world. He played for kings and queens, played his bagpipe, virtuoso guy. And then he retired to the backwoods of Kentucky. And his pastor came up and said to him, hey, this homeless guy died. Would you mind playing your bagpipes at his funeral? And he said, well, yeah, I'd love to do that. So he's driving in the backwoods of Kentucky. He gets lost. And by the time he comes up to the funeral, it's already done. Grave sitting there open. The workers are sitting there having lunch. So he walks over to the grave. It was sealed. Vault was sealed. He doesn't know what to do, so he starts playing Amazing Grace on his bagpipes. And he's pouring out his soul for this homeless man. The woods were full of the sound of his bagpipes as he played Amazing Grace for this homeless man. Then he looked up and he noticed the workers were starting to weep. And then he started to weep. He wept, they wept, as he poured out his soul playing Amazing Grace for this homeless man. So he finished, he's getting back in his car. He overheard one of the workers say, that's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And I've been putting in septic tanks for 20 years.
Ladies and gentlemen, another show from Robert Zima. There it is. All right. Dean Roberts.